My husband and I both work full-time jobs, and we manage to maintain a peaceful and cooperative daily life together. The only thorn in my side is my mother-in-law, Brenda, who believes it's my duty to ensure the family legacy through a son. She completely disregards the fact that I work remotely and calls me every single day to demand grandchildren. I brushed it off at first, but one day, Brenda and my sister-in-law, Margaret, barged into my house, pinned me down, and tied me to a chair with rope. "Stop, it hurts, someone help me," I screamed, but Brenda and Margaret only laughed cruelly. And to make matters worse, this horrifying scene was being live-streamed during a business meeting with a client. Call the police. The person who saved me turned out to be someone who shocked even Brenda and Margaret. My name is Nancy. I'm 33 years old, married, and work for a company specializing in imported furniture sales. My husband, Gary, is 2 years older than me at 35. He works for a prestigious trading company known as one of the best in the industry. We've been married for 5 years, but despite trying, we haven't been blessed with children yet. We hoped nature would take its course, but things haven't gone as we wished. It might sound arrogant to say this, but I've always been proud of achieving whatever I set my mind to through hard work. I got into my top choice university's foreign language program, studied abroad thanks to my parents, and graduated on time thanks to an exchange program. This allowed me to land a stable job in the career I had dreamed of, utilizing my language skills. That's not to say my childhood was all about studying, or that I lived a rigid, overly disciplined life. I genuinely enjoyed studying and took the initiative myself, earning the trust of my parents and teachers. I was given a lot of freedom to make my own decisions and set my pace in life. However, I was never athletic and preferred staying indoors. During middle school, I joined the band and spent countless hours practicing with my teammates. Some of those friends are still close to me today, as are the best friends I made in high school. I feel truly fortunate to have such meaningful connections. With a strong academic background and a solid career, I also found an amazing life partner. I met Gary through a mutual friend, and we clicked immediately because of our shared values. It didn't take long for us to start dating seriously with marriage in mind. Our married life has been nothing short of fulfilling. However, for the first time in my life, I've encountered something that my hard work alone can't solve. Having a child is not something I can achieve on my own, no matter how much effort I put into it. It requires cooperation from my partner, and even then, there are no guarantees. In my life plan, I had envisioned having my first child within 2 or 3 years of getting married, followed shortly by a second child, but reality has turned out to be far from that ideal. That said, I'm not desperate enough to actively pursue preconception care. I love my work and enjoy my fulfilling daily life, so I've started to think that a life without children might not be so bad. Gary feels the same way, and we're perfectly aligned as a couple. However, there is one person who has no qualms about barging into our life uninvited. That person is my mother-in-law, Brenda. "Nancy, when will I get to hold Gary's baby in my arms?" As soon as Brenda found out that I work remotely, she started calling me frequently, even in the middle of weekdays, without any regard for my work schedule. Brenda, as I've mentioned before, even though I work from home, I'm still on the clock. I'd appreciate it if you could avoid calling during work hours unless it's an emergency. I've told her this countless times, and Gary has even tried to caution her, but she always prioritizes her feelings. She comes up with flimsy excuses to justify her calls. Well, How dare you say that such an important matter about the family legacy isn't a big deal? No, that's not what I'm saying. I try to explain that it's about the timing, not the topic, but she shifts the argument and turns into a hysterical drama queen. Being dedicated to work is fine, but if you're not going to have kids, then you're not fit to be my son's wife. Listening to outdated assertions makes me feel like I've traveled back in time. Honestly, being excluded as the son's wife and not treated as part of the family might actually work in my favor. Yet, Brenda doesn't truly want to accept me as part of the family. And still, she constantly insists that I should act like a proper wife for her son. The reason why my relationship with Brenda has become so strained goes back to an event from 5.5 years ago. It was when we asked her to sign a witness section on our marriage license. Gary has an older sister, Margaret, who is 2 years older, and a younger brother, Ryan, who is 7 years younger. Margaret is married, but Ryan is staunchly single by choice. Although Gary, as the eldest son, is traditionally expected to carry on the family name, he personally had no problem with us adopting my last name after our marriage. Gary didn't hold on to old-fashioned views about family legacy. For him, marriage was about the union of two individuals, with family being a supportive but secondary part of that connection. That's not to say he disregards his family. Your family is very important to you, which makes them important to me as well. I want to respect them and be accepted as part of their lives. Gary met my parents pretty early on after we started dating. He made a point to introduce himself and let them know he was serious about our relationship. Even after I said yes to his proposal, he wasted no time going back to formally announce our engagement. Don't worry, Gary, you don't have to try too hard. You're wonderful just the way you are. That's what I told him on the day he first met my parents, when he was visibly nervous. And I was right. My parents immediately took a liking to him. They saw him as a polite, respectable young man. After that, every time I brought Gary to my parents' house, they were thrilled to see him. He never felt the need to act differently. My parents accepted him for who he truly was. On our way home from a family meeting at my parents' house, Gary brought up the topic of my last name. I mean, I have a younger brother, right? But you're an only child. Wouldn't your dad and mom feel a little lonely if your last name changed after you got married? I could feel his thoughtfulness, not just for me, but for my parents as well. And it made me incredibly happy. But Brenda's not going to approve of that. Remember when we went to your parents' house for a family meeting? She kept saying things like, "You're the heir of this family," and as the wife of the eldest son. His mother, Brenda, had a completely different perspective from Gary. She seemed to hold on to traditional values about family legacy, expecting the eldest son to carry on the family name and responsibilities. I never had the chance to meet Gary's father. He had already passed away by the time Gary and I started dating, so I don't know what kind of person he was. But from the way Gary would fondly reminisce about him, it was clear he deeply respected his father. As the breadwinner of the family, his father must have been someone Brenda relied on heavily. Now that he's gone, it feels like Brenda expects Gary to step into that role. Even though we're getting married, we'd never abandon our families. From now on, I hoped Brenda could understand that our priority would be the new life Gary and I were building together. For Brenda, Gary is her pride and joy, a well-educated man working at a prestigious company. It's natural for her to feel proud of him. Yet, there's a part of her that seems to see me as the woman taking her son away. I could feel her cold stares, but I couldn't bring myself to talk to Gary about it. "Mom's just lonely," Gary said. "Margaret's married and moved out. Dad's gone. and Ryan's living overseas. She's probably just feeling like there's nothing keeping her grounded at home. Gary's younger brother, Ryan, is currently living abroad. Unlike Gary, Ryan is more of a free spirit. He decided to spend time in Australia on a working holiday, saying, "Let me do what I want until I'm 30. Brenda often mentioned how lonely she felt living alone, and hinted at wanting us to move in with her after we got married. "Are you sure we don't need to live with Brenda?" I asked. "No way. I'd hate that," Gary replied. "I know Mom means well and loves taking care of the family, but honestly, it's suffocating. Keeping a healthy distance works best for everyone." I completely agreed with him. We were on the same page about this. While Gary didn't seem to notice Brenda's competitive attitude toward me as a fellow woman, he was aware of her underlying desire to keep him close. A bit of physical and emotional distance felt like the best solution for all of us, both as parent and child, and as mother-in-law and daughter-in-law. A few weeks later, at a family gathering where both sides met, Brenda played the part of the perfect mother-in-law flawlessly. My parents seemed completely at ease and told me they had no doubts about Gary and me starting a happy life together. They were fully supportive. When Gary and I decided on a wedding date, we informed both families and planned to submit our marriage license on the same day. Before the ceremony, we needed Brenda and my dad to sign the witness section on the paperwork. That's when Brenda's facade as the ideal mother-in-law quickly crumbled. "Nancy is an only child, so I think it's fine if I take her last name," Gary said. Brenda's expression darkened with anger as she strongly opposed the idea. "Gary, what on earth are you saying? Have you lost your mind?" The elegance she had been pretending to have completely vanished, leaving my parents stunned and speechless. "You are the precious heir to our family. The thought of him being taken by his wife's family is just revolting." I was shocked by her claim, knowing that neither Gary nor I had any intentions of belonging exclusively to either family. "Mom, you're being ridiculous. Besides, if we're talking about heirs, there's still Ryan," Gary argued. "Ryan, he's the second son, irresponsible, and says he's never going to marry or have kids. That's why you, Gary, must carry on the family name in case anything happens." From what I could tell, Gary's family was far from the kind of wealthy lineage where siblings fought over inheritance. They were a modest, middle-class family at best. Quietly, I thought to myself that my family seemed more financially well off. Unlike Gary, I was an only child. Perhaps it's just my perspective after growing up with all the resources and attention my parents could afford to give me. Besides, Margaret had no issue taking her husband's name and staying close to her family. It seemed like Brenda was the only one so obsessed with family legacy. Thankfully, my dad smoothed things over before the argument escalated. "We've never had any intention of keeping our daughter close to us, so please don't worry about that. Nancy will take Gary's last name," my dad reassured Brenda. That calmed her down, and the engagement was saved. However, Brenda's resentment toward me never truly disappeared. Had we been blessed with children sooner, perhaps the dynamic might have improved. But unfortunately, the tension between us as mother-in-law and daughter-in-law remained unresolved. "Nancy, are you even listening?" Brenda's high-pitched voice cut through my thoughts as I recalled all these memories. "Oh, I've just been notified of an online meeting at work, so I'll have to excuse myself, Nancy." Brenda's voice trailed off as I quickly ended the call. I had fabricated an urgent meeting to escape the conversation, hoping that even if a higher power were watching, they'd forgive this small lie. How could someone as reasonable as Gary have a parent who was so utterly unyielding and unreasonable? I couldn't help but wonder. If Gary's father were still alive, I'm certain he would have been able to rein Brenda in. Perhaps her desire to take care of someone had nowhere else to go after his passing. It was as if her need to nurture had fixated on Gary's yet-unborn child. Margaret and her husband hadn't had children yet either. If they had, Brenda's attention might have shifted away from us. The thought of that felt bittersweet. Maybe Gary learned to be the thoughtful and understanding person he is today by growing up with Brenda as his opposite. To stay with him as his partner for life, I would have to find my own way to make peace with Brenda. I told myself this was a test of mental endurance, and I would find a way to get through it. No, I had to find a way to get through it. However, my resolve was shattered when I encountered a situation far worse than Brenda's endless phone calls. One day, during remote work, while I was in the middle of a virtual meeting, someone suddenly grabbed me from behind. Paralyzed by the fear of not knowing what might happen, I couldn't speak, let alone scream. Wearing noise-canceling earphones to prevent feedback, I hadn't noticed the stealthy approach of whoever was behind me. Unable to move, and terrified of making the situation worse, I decided to stay completely still, hoping it was the safest option. But then, I heard a familiar voice outside the earphones. "Hurry up and tie her." It was Brenda's voice, one I never wanted to hear, yet couldn't escape. "Stay still." Following Brenda's orders, Margaret held me down even tighter. "Stop, you're hurting me." I tried to resist, but against the two of them, I didn't stand a chance. My arms were forced behind my back and tied together, followed by my legs, leaving me bound to the chair. "Someone, help me!" I shouted at the computer screen, desperate for help. "What are you even saying? There's no one here except us, so shouting is pointless," Brenda scoffed. Since the meeting participants had their cameras turned off, the screen was mostly black. On the contrary, the participants on the other side should have been able to see everything happening on my end. As the host of this virtual meeting, I had left my camera on the entire time. "Brenda and Margaret, isn't it?" I asked, trying to confirm their identities. They didn't answer. Even with my earphones on, I have ambient sound mode enabled, so I can hear you. "Answer me." Brenda and Margaret remained silent, focused entirely on tying me up. Though I couldn't move my neck, the black screen acted like a mirror, reflecting Brenda and Margaret behind me. I deeply regretted the moment Brenda demanded a spare key for emergencies, and I reluctantly handed it over. The meeting participants, two employees from a partner company, remained silent, possibly too stunned to understand what was happening. Or maybe they were too afraid to intervene. Earlier, I had foolishly revealed that the people attacking me were Brenda and Margaret, people I knew. That might have been a mistake. If they believed this was just a family dispute, they might think it wouldn't escalate into something serious and choose not to intervene. Worse, they might simply find it amusing and decide not to help at all. But if it's him, he'll do something. I looked up at the clock on the wall, clutching a faint hope. The person scheduled to join the meeting later might be my only chance. "You always act so high and mighty, pretending to be a working woman and ignoring my calls," Brenda sneered. "And here you are, not even working remotely. You're just flipping through some interior design catalog, acting like you're doing something important." Brenda and Margaret stood over me, laughing mockingly. They must have assumed I had been leisurely browsing the catalog next to my computer. In a way, it worked in my favor. Then the two of them started whispering to each other and moved away from me for a moment. When they talked in low voices far from my ears, I couldn't make out what they were saying. Apparently, they had deliberately left my earphones on, likely to ensure I couldn't hear them clearly. However, these two weren't very tech-savvy. They looked at the dark computer screen and seemed to think I was just listening to music instead of working. Even though the top of the computer screen displayed my username and an icon, and the bottom showed a small marker indicating the meeting was ongoing, they didn't seem to notice. Perhaps people like them, who barely knew how to use a computer, couldn't comprehend the meaning of these indicators. It seemed they didn't realize the computer was still connected to an online meeting. "I'll check through your mobile phone now." Margaret forcibly pressed my finger onto the phone's lock screen, using the fingerprint scanner to unlock it. She began combing through my call history and opening messages one by one to scrutinize their content. At that moment, an icon appeared on the screen indicating that a new participant had joined the meeting. Though earlier than expected, it seemed that the new participant had been alerted to what was happening and hurriedly joined the meeting. "I'm on my way to help you," whispered a voice through my earphones. Completely engrossed in searching my phone, Brenda and Margaret didn't notice the change on the computer screen or the additional participant icon. "If you want to check my phone, go ahead, but could you at least untie me first?" I pleaded, enduring the pain but knowing it was a futile request. "You'll just destroy the evidence, so no," Margaret snapped. "Destroy what evidence? I have nothing to hide." Finally, Margaret pulled out my earphones. She must have realized that the noise-canceling earphones allowed us to talk normally and had been convenient for her. "See, I knew it. This woman's been messaging my husband. You thief." Margaret had removed my earphones to yell her accusations directly into my ears. She tightened the rope binding me to the chair even more. "Stop it, that hurts," I cried out, grimacing in pain. "How dare you, even as an in-law, go after my sister's husband? What a vile woman you are." "It's a misunderstanding. You can read the messages if you want," I tried to explain, but a man's voice cut through from the earphones still lying on the desk. He must have shouted at the top of his lungs, "Call the police." It was Thomas, Margaret's husband, who had joined the meeting midway. "What? Where is that voice coming from?" Wait, was that from the earphones? That voice? Could it be Thomas? Brenda and Margaret froze, shock etched across their faces. Glancing at the computer screen, they noticed the icons for the other two participants were gone, leaving only Thomas. Clearly, Thomas had dismissed the other participants to prevent further embarrassment for the family. "That's right. It's me, Thomas," he said firmly. "I've been in the meeting this whole time." "What? How is that possible?" Margaret's confident expression wavered, revealing her growing panic. "I'll explain later. For now, I've asked a colleague to call the police. If you have any sense left, you'll untie Nancy right now," Thomas said in a calm but commanding tone. "Margaret, the police. What do we do?" Brenda stammered, her face pale with fear. "Mom, Thomas is just bluffing. There's no way he'd actually report his wife and mother-in-law to the police," Margaret said, still trying to maintain her composure. Their dismissive attitude made it clear they never respected Thomas in the first place. "Listen to me," I tried again, only to be met with Margaret's icy glare. "Shut up, you cheating woman," Margaret growled. At that moment, the front door swung open, and Thomas stepped inside. He must have stayed connected to the meeting while rushing over in a taxi. Without hesitation, he pulled Brenda and Margaret away from me and untied the ropes binding me to the chair. "What on earth were you two thinking?" he said, his voice heavy with exasperation, anger overshadowed by sheer disbelief. "You wouldn't really call the police, right?" Brenda pleaded, panic creeping into her voice. After all, we're family. You wouldn't go that far, would you?" Thomas shook off their desperate pleas, staring coldly at them. "How can you ask that after what you just did? After seeing such barbaric behavior, how do you expect me to continue treating you as family?" From my perspective, he has always seemed like a calm and gentle person, but this was one of the rare times I saw him raise his voice. "You can't possibly mean calling the police. Please, stop this now. I'm begging you." Brenda, sensing the seriousness in Thomas's tone, pleaded with a panicked expression. Margaret, on the other hand, refused to back down. "How dare you act all self-righteous and accuse us, Thomas? Aren't you the one having an affair with her?" Margaret said this with a triumphant look, as if she had uncovered some shocking truth. "What? That's absolutely not true," I exclaimed. Margaret, an avid fan of romantic dramas and prone to oversimplification, had somehow equated the mere fact that Thomas and I exchanged messages to evidence of an affair. It seemed she had entirely forgotten Thomas's earlier statement that he had been participating in the online meeting. "You are really is reckless. Any normal person would immediately understand that when I said I was in an online meeting, it was work-related. But you, well, she has no grasp of social awareness, Margaret," Thomas said with a deep sigh. "What the heck? Don't treat me like an idiot. If it was work-related, you should have just told me honestly. The fact that you kept it a secret makes me think there was something shady going on." Margaret, who doesn't have a job herself, might not understand that bringing inappropriate emotions into a professional relationship or handling deals carelessly just isn't how work operates. As I said earlier, if you read all the messages, you'll see it's really just about work. Nancy's absolutely right. Recently, a contact in interior design introduced me to a restaurant production company. They were interested in buying imported furniture from my company for their new projects. As soon as I heard the company name, I realized it was where Margaret's husband, Thomas, works. I never imagined he would be the person in charge of the project. Thomas was equally surprised to see me, but his enthusiasm for this opportunity was undeniable. After years of developing this restaurant concept, his dream was finally becoming a reality. He was determined to make it succeed, and I felt compelled to support him however I could. We communicated frequently, both during and outside work hours. Perhaps this was why Margaret misunderstood. I happened to see the app notifications and realized they were from her. It was so frequent that I began to suspect an affair. I mean, every time a message came through from her, Thomas would grin and rush off to read it in private. I was just excited about the possibility of making my dream come true, and Nancy's furniture suggestions were genuinely amazing. It was purely professional. If only Margaret had asked Thomas directly, this misunderstanding could have been resolved easily. Instead, her paranoia spiraled out of control. "I'm not the one at fault. It's Thomas's behavior that made me misunderstand." Margaret stubbornly insisted it was all his fault. "You're the one who said not to bring work into our home, Margaret. Whenever I tried to talk about my projects, you just look annoyed and bury yourself in your mobile games. You never listened to me." Tears seemed to well up in Thomas's eyes. "After ignoring me for so long, you jumped to conclusions and caused this scene. And now, you and my mother have made fools of yourselves in front of my colleague. It's humiliating." Thomas spoke with an air of exhaustion. I agree with every single word Thomas just said. I murmured my agreement, and Thomas gave a wry smile in return. "Nancy, I'm so sorry for all of this." Thomas turned to me and apologized sincerely. "Thomas, you don't need to apologize. The people who should be apologizing are right there. I directed my sharp gaze at Brenda and Margaret. I can understand a wife getting carried away out of love and suspicion. But a mother, isn't it her job to stop such behavior? Then again, expecting Brenda to act rationally might be too much. Brenda's eyes widened as she quickly protested. How dare you? Are you implying I lack common sense? Given what you've done here today, it's baffling that you think otherwise. He is absolutely right in everything he said. Margaret told me about your alleged affair. And when she said it was with Gary's wife, I fought for Gary's sake. We had to get to the bottom of it. That's why we came here, to gather evidence. She tried to justify her actions as being motivated by concern for her daughter or moral outrage against infidelity. But truthfully, her primary goal seemed to be venting her frustration and putting her son's wife in her place. Thomas's suspicious behavior wasn't just about the app notifications. He's been coming home late more often and started going out alone on Saturdays. That's because of work. I've been incredibly busy managing the restaurant opening project, including this deal with Nancy. And on Saturdays, well, I've been going to a preconception care clinic. Thomas hesitated before explaining his secret hospital visits. At 41, he is older than Margaret. Despite their long marriage, they haven't been able to have children. Thomas started wondering if he might be the reason. To take the first step, he decided to visit a clinic for a thorough examination. Margaret might change for the better if she has a baby. I hoped for that and tried my best. It's admirable that Thomas took action himself, especially when many men shift the burden of infertility entirely onto their wives. At the same time, I couldn't help but think, whether it was the suspicion of an affair or the matter of the preconception care clinic, couldn't these issues have been resolved through simple communication? This couple was sorely lacking in that department. But Nancy, about what I said earlier, I don't think Margaret acted out of love. I know she doesn't love me. She only sees me as someone who brings home money. Thomas muttered this with a sigh. Margaret should have vehemently denied it, but instead, she hesitated. Her silence essentially confirmed his words. Margaret has a spending problem. Shopping, lunches with friends. She burns through money well beyond what we can afford. Deep down, she looks down on me, as if marrying me was doing me a favor. And yet, you still want a baby with her. You must really care about her. I felt touched by Thomas's loyalty, and tears welled up in my eyes. No, I don't think that's it. I just didn't want to admit that my marriage was a failure. I turned a blind eye to the truth. He looked utterly defeated as he spoke. Brenda and Margaret didn't argue or push back any further. By now, it had been quite some time since Thomas arrived at the house, and yet there was no sign of the police. As I suspected, Thomas's earlier outburst about calling the cops was likely just to scare Brenda and Margaret. At that moment, Gary came home. Apparently, Thomas had explained the situation to him briefly while in the taxi. The moment Gary walked in, he began lecturing Brenda and Margaret. Then, to everyone's surprise, he declared them cut off. Anyone who would treat Nancy so horribly is no longer family to me. I've overlooked a lot out of gratitude for what you've done for me. But this is unforgivable. I'd never seen him this angry in all the time I'd known him. Honestly, I've been sick of Mom's overbearing behavior since I was a kid. Watching her act jealous of my wife, as if Nancy took me away from her, is honestly disgusting. Gary's harsh words left Brenda completely stunned. Even I was shocked. I had refrained from discussing Brenda's hostility toward me, thinking it would be too awkward. But it turned out he had seen through it all along. Even in family relationships, There should be mutual consideration. Not everything needs to be laid bare, but there's a balance that keeps the peace. Brenda and Margaret had utterly destroyed that balance. Gary, you seem so refreshed. And you're right. Someone who treats the people you love so poorly isn't family. Maybe I haven't been valuing myself enough. Margaret, I want a divorce. Thomas's heartfelt admission left Margaret with no choice but to hang her head. The truth was, their marriage had been broken long before any suspicions of an affair surfaced. Brenda, meanwhile, faced a double blow. And not only was she rejected by her eldest son, but her daughter's divorce now seemed inevitable. She appeared deeply shaken. The online meetings were recorded because I, as the host, needed to document them. That means I can submit the footage as evidence to the police anytime. If you pull another stunt like this, I won't hesitate to press charges. Gary's firm stance gave me the courage to make my own declaration. Soon after, Thomas and Margaret finalized their divorce. Margaret blamed her misfortune on her mother's failure to stop her from spiraling, further straining their relationship. Brenda, now without a solid emotional anchor, began pressuring Ryan, my brother-in-law living in Australia, to return to America. Gary mentioned that Ryan had vented his frustrations to him. Even Brenda, who usually had nerves of steel, refrained from contacting us. As for Gary and me, our married life continued peacefully. And then we discovered I was pregnant. To tell the truth, when Brenda and Margaret had tied me up that day, I hadn't realized it yet. But our baby was already with us. Thinking about what could have happened made me even more resolute not to forgive them so easily. I plan to keep as much distance from them as possible moving forward. Gary, excited as ever, has already started buying baby clothes, even though my belly hasn't started to show. He's eagerly anticipating our child's arrival. As I cradle this new life within me, I feel like I'm carrying the future itself. I want to live happily, with the strength to protect what truly matters.